I want to talk about the Headbangers Ball for a bit, but before we get into that, you mentioned wrestling. You were a backstage commentator, backstage interviewer in WCW. After I had left, I remember seeing you on the show. I was like, "Damn, where was he the 3 years I was there?" But you did have a stint working for WCW.
Yeah, and I was so bummed out because when I worked for WCW, I've always wanted to be a heel manager. That was my dream because it's so easy to get people to hate me. And I wanted to do it, and they had me doing like spring break stuff, so instead, if I was going to work with, I don't know, Vampiro, instead they have me going tough actin' to actin' and stuff like that. But the coolest, that's true. But I did get to help host the Miss Nitro contest. And that was where we met at one bar in Chicago. We met Stacy Keibler.
Yes.
Stacy was just like, I'm like, here's this girl that's beautiful and is so nice. She was just like a really nice person. She ended up winning. But I was working with the Nitro girls all the time. So every time I'd go to a town, it would always be like me going out to dinner with the Nitro girls. And every one of the Nitro girls always looked at me as a brother. Like no girl was ever like, "Hey, Riki." It was always like, "Our brother, Riki." The cool thing is, like, my dressing room would be with Gene and the Brain. And I would just sit there in the dressing room listening to these guys. And it was just awesome. And I was the guy, like, I remember every match, as soon as somebody was done with their match, they had their roll-out suitcase and they were gone. And as soon as I was done with all the stupid stuff I had to do, I would just sit in the stands and work there. And I mean, I got to ride in limos with Ric Flair, and I got to do all this stuff and I would just get so bummed out because I was like, just let me do something. Let me do anything. And I never did anything. And they kept on having me do spring break stuff. And I was probably like in my mid-30s with a bunch of young high school, college kids like, "Hey, all right." And it was always like, that was the one. It was always like tough actin' to actin'. That's what I would do, those promos. I do some college stuff. And I had so much fun. But I was always very frustrated because I was never doing anything really, really cool. And I always thought that would be awesome. But I learned a lot. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, and you know this better than anybody in the world. There are similarities between rock and roll and wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And
a lot of similarities for sure.
So great. I mean, it's fun. Charles Robinson, I see like almost once every 2 weeks. Charles Robinson lives by me. So I get to see him all the time. And even though I've known Charles and he's a good friend, he was at my wedding, he hates it if I talk about wrestling. That's the last thing I talk about is wrestling. And I love hearing the stories about wrestling.
Tell us, do you have a great story about Bobby the Brain Heenan or Mean Gene Okerlund? Because those guys are two of my favorites. So funny, idiots.
I'll tell you a story. This is not about either of them. So one night, Eric Bischoff is just drunk off his ass, right? And Eric Bischoff takes me in the bar and he's like, "Riki, I got big ideas for you in WCW." And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like all excited. And he was like, "You're going to be the next Mean Gene." And I said, like, I don't want to be the next Mean. I can't be the next, because Gene was the best, he was just so good. And he was telling me all these, how he's going to make me this great announcer. And I said, I kind of wanted to be a manager and I wanted to do this. And he was just telling me all, and I just remember that him being drunk and nothing ever happened. And I wrote to him, "Hey, remember when you told me that?" That's the story that I remember. I can't remember all the stories that he told me because my memory's so jacked up. But I remember him, going back to stories about Harley Race and stuff like that. But I don't remember that. I mean, I really wish I could remember those stories because, I remember sitting there and thinking like, wow, like this is a really cool place to be. I was a total fan.
Sure.
But being there and working with these guys and hearing these people tell stories and, being so intimidated and meeting some people. Scott Hall hit me in the chest so damn. Scott Hall came up to me one time. And I'm being dork guy. And I'm like, "So what's the big difference?" This wasn't on camera. This is just, we were all at a bar. And I'm like, So what are some of the big differences between wrestling in Japan and wrestling in America? I don't know if I told you this story before or not. And Scott Hall goes, well, in America, they hit you like this. And he hit me in the chest. And he goes, and in Japan, they hit you like this. And he hit me in the chest so freaking hard. And I just sit there and I was like, wow, what a dick.
That's about it at the time, right?
But and I remember being really scared and intimidated by Scott Steiner, who ended up being a pretty good dude.
Yeah, but very intimidating though, especially back then. He was kind of off his rocker.
He was off his rocker, but but I ended up seeing him at a convention probably like 3 years ago. Couldn't have been a sweeter guy. Was so nice. I remember a time that he had real heat with Buff Bagwell, and everybody that worked for WCW was really anticipating what was going to happen in the match because I think they really wanted to rip each other's heads off.
Right.
So I kind of remember that kind of stuff. And there was all sorts of drama with people getting in trouble during spring break and this and that. And it was fun. I wish I could remember more